So just stand right there, and then I'll swear you in, and you have a seat. Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear affirm the evidence you about to present in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Doctor. Have a seat, if you would, please. Please state your name for the record and spell it, if you would.
My name is Dr. Laura, L-O-R-A, Darasaw, D-A-R-R-I-S-A-W.
Dr. Darasaw, where do you work?
I work at the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation,
How long have you been working there?
since 2002, 22 years.
Tell the jury, if you would, your education after high school, your college, and medical background.
I received my electrical engineering degree from Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I received my medical doctorate degree from the Medical College of Wisconsin, which is also in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Following that, I did 4 years of residency in pathology at the hospitals of the Medical College of Wisconsin. I then did subspecialty training in pediatric pathology at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, and I did my forensic pathology training at the GBI through the Medical College of Georgia. And then I also received a Master's of Science degree in public administration from Columbus State University.
What is your official title?
I am the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner and the Director of Pediatric Forensics at the GBI.
And in your position now, do you have any type of specialty or any type of things that you focus on mainly?
I focus on, forensic pathology as a whole, but I also focus on the child deaths and pediatric aspects of forensic pathology.
And outside of your education, what type of things do you do to make sure that you're qualified to do your job? Any type of continuing education or specialties?
Yes, continuing education by way of conferences or continuing medical education credits through online type activities are required to maintain the license.
Are you licensed to practice medicine in these states?
Yes, I'm licensed in Georgia and Wisconsin.
And have you had an opportunity to testify in any courts regarding your specialty, what you do as a medical examiner?
Yes, sir. I've testified 270 times in courts in Georgia.
How many times have you performed an autopsy in general?
To date, I have performed or directly supervised 7,542 autopsies.
And how many times have those been on children?
1,783.
Here at this time, State Tenders, Dr. Darasaw is an expert in forensic pathology and autopsies.
No objection.
So noted.
All right, doctor, we got that out of the way. Let me just ask you some questions about, can you just give us a brief understanding of what an autopsy is and what do you do when you do an autopsy?
Yes, so an autopsy is an examination of a person who has died. There are two major parts of the autopsy, the external examination and the internal examination. The external examination is very similar to the type of examination that you and I get when we go to the doctor. We obtain a height and weight. We look at the body in general in terms of just the features of the body. If there are any injuries that may be identified, those are documented and identified. Following the external examination, the internal examination is when cuts are made in the body to remove the organs. Once the organs are removed, those organs are evaluated and looked at for either a natural disease process or if they are injured, the injuries are documented. And the overall purpose for doing the autopsy is to determine the cause of the individual's death and then ultimately a manner of death.
Forensic pathology, how is that different, say, someone that's just a doctor and does pathology?
Forensic pathology is a subspecialty of pathology. A practicing pathologist usually works in a hospital. These are the doctors that will look at and evaluate tissues and organs. If you have surgery, for instance, if you have an appendix taken out, the pathologist is the doctor that looks at that appendix and makes a diagnosis. It may be a tumor or a cancer in an organ or maybe just an infectious process. The forensic specialty of pathology involves focusing on cause and manner of death, particularly if the death is sudden, unexpected, of violent means, or under suspicious circumstances.
And you talk about cause of death and then type of death. What type of causes of death and things do you look for in cases?
So causes of death may be a natural disease process. It may be an acute drug toxicity. It may be an injury such as a gunshot wound or a stab wound. These are the type of things that are causes of death. It's the thing that actually finally results ultimately in a person dying.
After looking at the cause of death, the act or the thing that caused death to a person, do you also classify what type of manner of death it is?
Yes, sir.
And what are those categories for that?
And the manner of death is a limited amount of manners. So manners are limited, at least in the state of Georgia, to 5. Most states have 5, some states may have 6. The manner of death involves or is focused on the circumstances by which an individual has died. So a homicide manner of death is when the circumstances are that another individual's actions caused that person's death. Suicide is a manner in which your own actions cause your death. You've taken your own life. Accident is a manner in which some inadvertent event like a car accident or a fall has caused the death. Natural manner is when a natural disease process causes your death, such as pneumonia or a heart attack. And when you can't really be definitive about either of those 4, another category of manner is undetermined.
Do you do autopsy in all homicides in the state of Georgia?
If they are reported, yes, sir. They should be reported. So under the laws of the state, yes, they should be.
Under the Georgia Death Investigation Act, are there certain times when you have to do an autopsy?
Yes, sir.
And when you have a criminal investigation where there's a homicide or was suspected of a homicide, is the GBI the place where the remains of the person is sent for an autopsy?
That's correct.
And when you
well,
have...
I should say, in some counties have their own medical examiner's office. So GBI is the state's medical examiner's office. The GBI is responsible for 152 of the 159 counties in Georgia. There are 7 metro counties that have a county medical examiner's office. In those instances, the body would go to those offices.
Do you know how many autopsies a year that you have to do on an average?
Me personally or
Yes.
our office?
Or both?
Personally, I probably average around 350 to 370, or in some cases I've done more than that, just depending on our staff purposes. I believe our office handles about 4,500 or so autopsies per year.
And how many people are actually medical examiners in the state?
Currently, in our GBI system, there's 15.
When you do an autopsy, do you generate a report?
Yes, sir.
Is that in every case that you do that?
That's correct.
And when you do a report, what are the things that you are documenting in that report when it goes to evidence of injury and things like that?
So the report is going to document the autopsy itself. It's going to have the sections that deal with the external examination aspect of the autopsy that I talked about, and then it's going to have the section that involves the internal examination. Then there's also a summary and an opinion, and the cause and manner of death are indicated in the autopsy report.
And approach the witness, Your Honor. Dr. Aaron, you State's Exhibit 88. You just double check that, make sure that that is your autopsy report in this case.
Yes, sir.
Judge, I tender to evidence State's 88.
No objection. It's admitted.
May I post it, Your Honor?
Yes.
All right, Doctor, what I want to do is I kind of want to walk through your report, and I'm not going to show everything, but in this case, do you have a DOFS case number that relates to the autopsy and all the reports for the GBI? What would that be?
That's correct. So that would be the unique identifying number for a specific case. It begins with the year of the autopsy and then a specific number that is assigned to that case.
And looking at State's Exhibit 88 here on the top right is what is the case number in this case?
It's 2020 representing 2020, and the case number is 103-1455.
And what was the date that you generated this report?
I completed the report on December 30th, 2020.
And we'll get into the evidence here, and if you would give us the what day did you receive the remains in this case of Hannah?
That I have to find out where that is on the report. I can tell you the day I did the autopsy was on December 10th.
You see where it says evidence on this first page here? December 9th, 2020.
Yes, sir. Okay, so yeah, that's the day it was received. The autopsy was performed the following day.
And how does the GBI receive a person, the remains?
So I talked about the GBI is responsible for the 152 counties. Each county will have a coroner who is responsible for handling the deaths in that county. The bodies are received at our office in a body bag from the county of origin.
And here, who did you perform the autopsy on?
I performed the autopsy on Hannah Driver.
And can you tell us the statistics on Hannah, who she was in the sense of how much she weighed and how old she was?
Yeah, so that is in my autopsy report on page 3, beginning in the general external examination. This was a 13-month-old white child who was 23 pounds and 30 inches.
13 months, you said?
Yes.
When you perform an autopsy, I want to get into the section. You have a section in the report here, and I believe this is, I'm trying to figure out if this is on page 3 or 4 of yours. Evidence of injury, do you see that?
Yes, sir.
What page is it on yours there?
It starts on page 2 and ends on page 3.
So evidence of injury, I've noted, is it correct that you actually, when you go through this, I think there are 8 injuries or 8 things you note on evidence of injury?
Yes, I itemize 8 injuries.
And tell the jury, if you would, when you are performing an autopsy, do you visually give an entire perspective and look over all parts of the body to see what type of injuries there are and how they relate to the other injuries?
Yes, sir.
And how much did you know about what took place in this case before you did the autopsy?
So at the beginning of any autopsy, there is always investigative information and circumstantial information of that individual's death. And in fact, we will really not start an autopsy until we have some basic information. And this is just very similar to when we go to the doctor, we have to provide some information as to why we're there. And that focuses us on what we should expect and the type of autopsy we want to do. So the information that we get comes from the coroner. When the coroner reports the death in their county, they provide information of the circumstances of death. For instance, this was an individual that was found dead in bed, and the husband says she has a history of hypertension. That would be a hypothetical of an older person that died in bed. In this particular instance, this was the information that we received this was an individual child who had recently moved into a family with her mother, and then there was injuries that were identified on the child at the home. I mean, there was a lot more information, but I'm giving a very brief summary of such.
Did you know that this was a stabbing case?
Yes.
And when you're looking for the injuries, let's go through. You have the 8 here, beginning with the first one, the right anterior neck stab wound. Tell us about that one, number 1 you have.
So she had stab wounds on the front of her neck, being the anterior neck. The number 1 that I identified was a stab wound that penetrated somewhat superficially just into the tissues of the neck, into the muscle tissues, did not penetrate very deeply into the vital structures or vascular structures of the neck. The main structures of the neck would be the trachea, the esophagus, and like the carotid artery, the jugular veins.
The second one you have is left anterior neck. Tell us about that one, if you would.
This was another stab wound in the neck that was very similar in terms of its degree of injury to number 1. Not very deep into the neck, mainly stopped and penetrated the muscles, and no vital or vascular structures.
The third injury or stab wound is the central anterior lower neck. Seems to have more information on this one. Was this a more significant injury?
Yes, this was the most significant stab wound of the neck in terms of the injuries that it caused the sharp object, in this case being a knife, penetrated the neck. It severed or completely cut across the carotid artery, which is the major artery that supplies blood to the brain. There was an injury of the esophagus as well, and there was a defect that went all the way to the cervical vertebra related to this stab wound. It did not go through the vertebra into the spinal cord itself, but it stopped right at the vertebra, and there was a defect or a small nick on the vertebral bone.
And this third injury that you note here, it appears to be you talk about extensive hemorrhaging, and then I think you just talked about the trail of the injury itself. How much do you remember when you say extensive hemorrhaging? How much is that?
So in terms of all the tissues that are in the neck, I can see all the blood that's in the tissues, and I can just measure the extent of it. Also, though, there was also, as she was received, she was wearing a shirt that was saturated with blood. So I can't actually quantify in like a volume of how much blood there is, but I make note of a size range of the hemorrhage in the tissues.
It appears the knife traveled through, I think I've got here the muscle trap, carotid artery, esophagus, and then into the fourth vertebrae. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then how deep ultimately was at least how deep was the wound depth?
I measured it as at least 2 inches.
Now the fourth, there's a injury, paragraph 4 here. What was that?
So the other injuries, 4 through 8 that I identified, were much more minor. Number 4, there was a collection of abrasions on her chin, the lower part of her chin. Those are grouped together as one injury.
And then you had the fifth, the right anterior chin.
Yes.
Just some marks there too that you noted.
Yeah, the other injuries, well, I should say the 4, 5, and 6 were abrasions, which are small little marks. Sometimes they can be caused by, some of these may have been caused by the sharp object maybe nicking the skin. It was kind of unclear whether these were actually caused by a sharp object or maybe something else that scraped across her lower chin as she was being stabbed.
For the 7th evidence of injury, you talk about an injury to the back, the right upper back. What was that?
She also had a stab wound on the right upper back. The stab wound on the right upper back only penetrated into the muscle of the back. It did not go deep into and actually go into her body cavity at all.
And then finally, the 8th evidence of injury, what is that? The medial upper chest.
Yeah, on her chest, she had 2 small little puncture type marks. Unclear again here whether these were related to the knife causing small little punctures on her chest. So I just described them as puncture marks.
You're in that approach. I mean, State's Exhibits 89 through 98. See if those are photographs that you recognize from the autopsy.
Yes, sir.
Just at this time, I tendered to evidence State's Exhibits 89 through 98.
89 through 98 are admitted.
May I publish those, Your Honor?
Yes.
All right, Doctor, let's begin with Exhibit 89. Tell the jury what we have here, if you would.
So I testified that the bodies come to our office in a body bag from the county of origin. This is the body bag that Hannah was received in, and the bags will have tags, identification tags on there with the individual's name.
Going to State's Exhibit 90. What is this one?
This would be the initial photograph that's taken after the body bag is opened. You can see this is just how the body was received. She had gone to the hospital for emergency medical intervention. All of those devices and intervention things are on her body, the defibrillator patches, the endotracheal tube, and her clothes are on. And I previously mentioned that she had very clothes that were saturated with blood from the injury.
Is this how normally, when you do an autopsy, you receive the individual as they come to the, I guess, from the hospital or from the scene?
Yes, sir. This would be a part of our routine photographs that are taken, the routine photographs including the body bag with the tags, and then as soon as the body bag is open to show how the body was received before we began removing clothes and medical intervention.
States 91, what are we looking at here?
So now this is a photograph that documents the stab wound in the right upper back. This would be part of the external examination after all the clothing is removed, the body is cleaned, and if there are injuries, specific photographs of those injuries are taken. This stab wound I already mentioned, it did not penetrate deeply into the chest, it went just into the superficial muscles of the back.
And when you do an autopsy, do you use markers or rulers to show where the injury is in the proportion or relation to the body and other things?
Yes, sir. And then you can see on each of the photographs, the rulers will also have the identifying number or that specific case number.
States 92 is just a closer up look of the injury to Hannah's back.
That's correct.
And anything about the injury itself, are you familiar with the knife and the way the blade makes an indentation or wound like that?
The injury itself doesn't always allow one to make a specific identification of the knife. There are things characteristics that if we are shown knives, we may say the wound is consistent with it or not consistent with it. But in terms of just documenting it, it's documented as the type of wound it is. It's a stab wound. We'll talk about where it is located as it relates to the body and the orientation. This particular wound is oriented horizontally from 3 to, we'll do a clock face type of orientation. So I'll document all the features of it. I'm not able to say specifically what knife or what caused it, but if I were presented several objects, I may say whether it's consistent or not consistent with that particular implement.
And is it accurate that if we see a photograph with a placard showing an injury, those are the injuries that you found on Hannah and there's no other injuries? In other words, the photographs where we show the actual stabbings or things like that, are you showing the rest of the body, there's no injuries like on the feet or the legs or things like that?
Oh, yes, sir. I didn't understand your question, but yes. So the photographs that we take, we'll take some general photographs that we take on all cases that I talked about, overall picture of the body, we take an overall picture of the face, and then specific documentation photographs for the injuries. If there are no injuries, no pictures, I should say, for instance, of the feet, that means I didn't see any injuries there.
Right, there could be other pictures or pictures we don't use, but what we see are the injuries that are relevant to your autopsy and your opinion in this case. Is that right?
That's correct.
States 93, what do we have here?
This would be one of the routine photographs of the face. We typically will always take a picture of the face of the individual. This is not a picture specifically to document a specific injury.
And then 94, you did note something around the chin on Hannah?
Yeah, although you can see, on the front of her chin, this patchy orange type appearance. This is, I don't remember if I caught this abrasions or excoriations, but it has the appearance of somewhat like a diaper rashes type thing. It's not a specific injury, but it is something that is documented as a skin abnormality. Let's put it that way.
States Exhibit 95, here on Hannah, what do we see here?
This photograph shows the specific stab wounds on her neck. We talked about the 3 stab wounds on her neck, and I also talked about some of the cluster of abrasions on the inferior chin. The upper 2 wounds were the wounds that were into the subcutaneous tissues and the muscles and didn't go deep into the vital structures or vascular structures of the neck. And the lower wound in the center of her neck was the wound that resulted in the most damage to the internal structures of the neck.
Under your summary of findings, you have a category stab wounds of the neck, and you have 3. Is that what you're discussing here?
That's correct.
And you have a transection of the artery here. Tell us about that. What does that mean? Of the right carotid artery, what does that mean?
So the carotid arteries, they are the major arteries that come from the heart and supply the blood to the brain. So they travel up through the neck. There's a right and a left. What did I say, the left one?
It's the right.
It's the right. So the right one, as one of the injuries to this stab wound, when I would say transected, means it was completely cut in half. So, the artery is like a tube, and it's completely cut in half.
And we say that Hannah died of a stab wound, and the cause of death is the stab, but what is the mechanism, or how does she die? Is it lack of blood, or what causes the death?
Correct. Basically, and you can just pretty much say she kind of bled out. We don't really, when we talk about cause of death, it's not a mechanism. It's a specific injury or a cause. Mechanistically, this major artery was cut in half. There was a significant amount of blood from that artery, and she basically lost a lot of blood coming from that artery, which then subsequently did not allow her to have sufficient oxygen to her brain and ultimately to other parts of her body, and her heart stopped and she died.
Doctor, as we look at State's Exhibit 96 here, we're looking at the 3 stab wounds here. Any significant about the number that there are? And could one of those themselves have caused the death, or is it a combination? Or tell us, in your opinion, how that works together when we look at the injuries.
Well, I typically will always just group injuries like this. She doesn't have one stab wound to her neck. She has 3, and plus she also has a stab wound in her back, despite the fact that I talk about the 2 of them on the neck and then 1 on the back didn't really go deep into tissues. There's also, there's injury there. There's always small blood vessels, so collectively, I would say certainly the 1 major stab wound caused the most significant internal trauma, but collectively there's injuries that involve. So in that instance, I said stab wounds of the neck as her cause of death.
As we look at State's Exhibit 96, as we look at the major injuries, the bigger one we see on the left, is that what you're talking about? These injuries that we're talking about, or
the most significant one was, let me see, I believe it was the one in the center of the lower neck. Yes.
okay, which one of these, as you see that?
It would be that one. If you go down, yeah, that one would be the
Okay.
most significant.
Now, when it comes to the death of Hannah, and I know the timelines may not be the right phrase. I'm a lawyer. I'm not sure of the medical terms, and help me out on this. But I'm thinking of a question is, how long did it take Hannah to die? Are we talking about seconds, minutes, or hours?
And that's basically how we'll talk about how long it takes one to die. We can never say for sure, but certain types of injuries are categorized in those broad stroke-like time frames, instantaneous, seconds, minutes, hours, sometimes days, months, years. In a case like this, when you have a major artery involved, such as the carotid artery, this would be categorized as a death that results or takes time about minutes. You can't, but a short period of time, minutes. It's certainly not going to take hours for this injury to have occurred, and then she's not going to die for hours.
And this is the major injury that you know when we're going through, I think, paragraph 3 on the evidence of injury.
Correct.
And the depth of this, again, what was the wound depth?
At least 2 inches.
And this is the one that penetrated all the way to the vertebrae?
Yes, went to the vertebra, but not through it.
Go through 97, we're looking at going down her chest here. We see where the ruler is. What do we have here?
Yeah, these are the 2 little marks on her chest that I obviously documented that there are injuries on her body. I cannot be definitive and conclusive about what caused them. In the setting of her having stab wounds, could they be from the tip of the knife? That would be a reasonable suggestion, but I just categorized them as 2 punctate marks on her chest. They did not penetrate anything. They're just very superficial.
Doctor, did you find the absence of natural diseases or natural deaths that could explain the death of the child here?
Correct. So during the course of an autopsy, of course, I see these injuries. A complete autopsy is further performed where all of the organs of the body are taken out, they're looked at, because you also want to identify whether there was any other cause of death or a competing cause or a contributory cause. This was a 13-month-old child. I didn't find any other natural disease processes or injuries that caused or contributed to her death. And we may have done toxicology too. Yeah, I'm not actually sure, but oftentimes in such deaths we'll do a toxicology analysis.
Doctor, when I'm going to page 6 of your report and your opinion summary. In your expert opinion, can you even say, you can say that there are 4 stab wounds, is that right?
Yes, the 3 on the neck and the 1 on the back.
But can you in any way tell the jury which one occurred first and what order those happened in?
No, sir.
Is there anything else about the stab wounds that you could give the jury information about that's relevant to the cause of death and the manner of death of Hannah?
Not more than what we've talked about so far.
And when it comes ultimately to your opinion, what is your opinion for the cause of death of Hannah?
I certify the cause of death as stab wounds of the neck.
And in your expert opinion, your medical expert opinion, do you have an opinion on the manner of death? What is the manner of Hannah's death?
So based upon the circumstances, I certified the manner of death as homicide.
Nothing further on.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well.
Good. I just have 1 or 2 brief questions for you. So the manner of death listed as homicide, that's really just one of, I think you said 4 or 5 ways that you have to classify the
That's
type
one of the 5 manners that we have available to us, yes.
Okay, and typically the medical definition of homicide is that it's a death caused by the actions of another individual.
That's correct.
Okay. It doesn't, you're not making any assessment as to the underlying facts of the case or anything related to that when you make that medical determination, correct?
Correct. It's not a legal definition, so there is the difference between legal standards of things that happen when other people cause the death of another. Ours is homicide being hands at the actions of another individual.
Okay. As a medical definition is what you're telling me.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Go ahead.
And Dr. Defense Counsel asked you questions about your opinion. Basically, your area of expertise is medicine, so you're reaching an opinion on the medical side of it being a homicide. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you're not giving your opinion on whether or not this was murder, because that's a decision that's for someone else, specifically the jury, to make, and not an expert in the field. Is that right?
That's correct.
So at times there are certain opinions that are given by experts, but ultimately some questions, the legal, the forensic question, is going to be reserved to the jury. Is that right?
That's correct.
But we can't agree that the manner of death is one person's conduct or actions causing the death of another person, right?
Yes, in this case, yes, this is a homicide.
Thank you, ma'am. Nothing further on.
I have no other questions. Thank you.
Any reason to keep this witness?
There you are.
Let's try the mic. You can step down. Thank you, ma'am. The state may call its next witness.
Yes, ma'am. Photographs.
Can we just take a quick break? Let's drive a quick break.
Okay. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 10 till leave.